Mr. President, I ask that the reading of the amendment be waived.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
Senator from Maine.
I'm pleased to begin the floor consideration of the fiscal year 2016 Appropriations Bill for the Transportation, Housing and Urban Development and related agencies. This bill funds programs that are essential to the American people. Our bill provides $18.5 billion for the Department of Transportation and $38.5 billion for the Department of Housing and Urban Development to meet the housing needs of low-income, disabled, and older Americans, to shelter the homeless, and to boost our economy and create jobs through much-needed investments in our roads, bridges, seaports, railroads, transit systems, and airports. Let me begin my remarks by thanking the chairman of the full committee, Senator Cochran, and the vice chairman, Senator Mikulski, for their leadership in advancing these appropriations bills. As Chairman Cochran has previously noted, this is the first time in 6 years that the Appropriations Committee has approved all 12 of the funding bills, and I would point out we did so months ago. I also want to thank and acknowledge the hard work of my ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Jack Reed. I'm very pleased that he is co-sponsoring. We are offering together the substitute amendment that we have just filed. The two of us have worked very closely in drafting this bill, and we have listened to the recommendations from members on both sides of the aisle. Through considerable negotiation and compromise, we have crafted a bipartisan bill that targets limited resources to those programs that meet our most essential transportation and housing needs. As a result of hard work and compromise by many of our colleagues and the administration, the recent bipartisan budget bill allows the legislation before us today to be made even more effective. As I mentioned, I have offered on behalf of Senator Reed and myself a substitute that reflects the new allocation made possible by the budget agreement. This additional funding has allowed for further investments in key programs such as increasing the home program by $830 million for a total of $900 million, increasing the Community Development Block Grant Program by $100 million for a total of $3 billion. I would note that those are the current funding levels. The bill also provides $255 million in additional funds for the FAA's facilities and equipment account for a total of $2.8 billion, which is the budget requested level to ensure that critical aviation programs are not delayed. These programs offer a wide range of support from space-based surveillance, data communications to everyday basic needs of ensuring that power systems are fully supplied to support the aviation and air traffic systems that operate 24 hours, 7 days a week. We have also allocated an additional $100 million for the Tiger program for a total of $600 million for this important and much in demand program that supports infrastructure, economic development, and job creation throughout the nation. In fact, Mr. President, every state in the nation has benefited from the Tiger program. We are bringing the Marine Security Program up by $24 million for a total of $210 million to match the recently passed authorized level. And finally, we're providing an additional $311 million for FTA's Capital Investment Grants Program for a total of approximately $1.9 billion, which supports transit systems across the country. Mr. President, this bill is critical to meeting the vast needs of our nation's crumbling infrastructure. We've all heard of the low grade that the American Association of Civil Engineers has given to our bridges and our highways. Any of us, particularly those of us who represent large rural states, know of the deplorable condition of far too many of our roads and highways, and the need for state departments of transportation to post bridges that are no longer able to accommodate weight loads and modern traffic. The Tiger program will help us meet the needs of our crumbling infrastructure. This highly competitive program creates jobs. It supports economic growth in every one of our states. The need for the program is demonstrated by the statistics. Listen to this, my colleagues. The Department of Transportation has received 627 eligible applications requesting more than $10 billion for fiscal year 2015 from all over the country. But only 39 of those 627 eligible applications were able to be funded. Only $500 million of the more than $10.1 billion in requested funds could be granted. This is a successful program with an overwhelming demand, and I'm happy that the new allocation allows us to give it a modest increase. It doesn't begin to match the application level for this program, which again is a reflection of our infrastructure needs in this country. Turning to air travel, the aviation investments will continue to modernize our nation's air traffic system and help to keep rural communities connected to the transportation network. These investments are creating safer skies and a more efficient airspace to move the flying public. Mr. President, I've been very troubled by the devastating rail accidents that have occurred in recent years. In 2013, the runaway train near the Maine border in the province of Quebec in Canada devastated the community of Lac-Mégantic, and the inferno killed 47 people. First responders from Maine responded to the calls for help from their Canadian counterparts and helped to put out this terrible fire. More recently, we've seen an Amtrak train in Pennsylvania derail, killing 8 passengers. We've seen case after case of cars, rail cars, turning over, spilling hazardous substances. This is a real problem, and it is one that this bill addresses. To improve rail safety, our legislation provides $50 million in new funding for infrastructure improvements, rail-grade crossings, and positive train control safety technology. In addition to rail, we've included several important provisions to enhance truck safety on our nation's highways. For example, our bill requires the Department of Transportation to finalize a rule mandating electronic logging devices within 60 days of enactment. Mr. President, this rule is critical to ensuring that bad actors will not be able to falsify their records. It will bring greater accountability to the industry. It helps those good truck drivers, the vast majority of our truck drivers, to separate them from the bad apples who are falsifying their logs. The bill also requires the Department of Transportation to publish a proposed rule on speed governors, which limit the speeds at which trucks can operate. Mr. President, the department has delayed this important rulemaking 22 times since 2011. It is far past time to get this important safety rule completed and implemented. And it isn't just the ranking member and I who think so. This is also supported by the trucking industry itself. We need to make progress in both the area of electronic logs and speed governors, and our bill will ensure that that occurs. We also provide funding for the Office of Defects Investigation at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to analyze consumer complaints and trends related to vehicle safety defects. Now, you may recall, Mr. President, this agency came under scrutiny this past year for failing to discover and act on defective airbags as well as faulty ignition safety switches. We must ensure that remedies are implemented promptly and make certain that the public is better informed of critical defects. Our bill also provides for critical housing programs. It preserves existing rental assistance for vulnerable families and individuals, and it improves the federal response to the problem of youth homelessness. Both of these were priorities for me, Mr. President. I wanted to make sure that those vulnerable low-income families, that our disabled citizens, that our low-income seniors did not lose the subsidized housing to which they are entitled and in which they are already living. So that is a very important provision. I would note, when you look at the Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget, that more than 83% of the budget is devoted to these programs that are so vital to ensuring safe and affordable housing for some of the most vulnerable Americans. Improving the federal response to homelessness is also an important priority for me. That's why we placed a special emphasis on this bill on the growing problem of youth homelessness, and we have funded additional vouchers for what is known as the VASH program that is aimed at our homeless veterans. Sufficient funding is provided to keep pace with the rising cost of housing vulnerable families. Now, I will note that doing so this year has been especially challenging, given the administration's decision to lower mortgage insurance premiums, because that reduced FHA receipts by nearly $1.1 billion. But despite this challenge, this bill, by setting priorities, ensures that the more than 4.7 million individuals and families currently housed will not have to worry about losing their assistance. And again, let me emphasize, without this assistance, many of these families, many of our disabled Americans, many of our low-income seniors could become homeless. We're preventing that. The increase in youth homelessness is especially troubling and warrants more attention. Reflecting this concern, $40 million is provided to expand efforts to reduce youth homelessness. In addition, the bill includes funding for more than 2,500 family unification vouchers to assist our young people who are exiting the foster care system. It extends the amount of time that these youth can use their vouchers. Mr. President, I'm sure if you talked to foster youth in your state, it would be the same as mine. You will find that when they reach a certain age, they're no longer eligible for care by foster families, and they have nowhere to go. And oftentimes, they end up in shelters. That is not an acceptable situation. So by expanding these family unification vouchers, we're hoping to ensure that these youth are not homeless or forced to live in shelters. These efforts build on our success in reducing veterans' homelessness. We have had real success in this area. VASH is a program that actually works. We've reduced the number of homeless veterans by 1/3, but the job is not done. And we have a goal in this country of ending homelessness among our veterans who have served our country. So we would provide an additional 10,000 vouchers for our homeless veterans so we can complete our work and reach that goal. Our bill is also an important source of local development. We worked hard to provide $3 billion for the Community Development Block Grant Program. This is an extremely popular program with the states and communities because it allows them to tailor federal funds to support local economic and job creation projects. In fact, in my state, it's one of the most popular economic development programs, and I think that's true across America because it isn't a top-down federal government dictating how you use the funds. Instead, there is great flexibility in providing funds to states and communities, and they decide what is needed. They match the funds. There's often private sector money involved as well. It may be to revitalize the downtown, to build affordable housing. Whatever that particular community decides will spur economic development and create jobs. This is a job creation program, and it's one that is flexible and recognizes that those at the local and state better know best what their economic development and job creation priorities are. Now, Mr. President, the bill before us does not solve all of the problems facing housing and transportation in this country. We simply do not have the money to do that, even with the higher allocation in this era where we are facing a $17 trillion debt. This is a fiscally responsible bill. It reflects priorities. We cannot fund every good program out there. We have to make choices. We certainly don't want to fund programs that are not effective. We have put our money on our priority programs that will make a real difference. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to present our appropriations bill to this chamber. Again, I want to thank my ranking member, Senator Jack Reed, with whom we've worked very closely on the substitute amendment. And as we begin debate on the Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill, I urge my colleagues to consider the careful balance struck by the compromise that our subcommittee and our full committee worked so hard to achieve. Thank you, Mr. President.